Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, lovers of the Some Point Global TV, to another new week. Last week we had a very hectic week. We were talking about women, equality. This week we are switching on to something because we are looking forward to the Racism Week. Last week we talked about women crying that men get off our necks, with many women who intervened, CEOs who motivated and encouraged women not to look on their gender, but to concentrate on what has to be done. And today, our topic, which will be a program for 1 hour, of course, last week we were having 1 hour, 30 minutes, because women had much to say, and that the cry for women was already so heard and very, very conspicuous. So today we'll be looking at racism, or how racism has affected the development of African continent. And the question we're asking ourselves is, what must we do to repair this situation? I am Mbolifor Elvis Mbolifor, your host, and today with me we're having Penelope, who is coming up again. She's always around when we need her, and she will be telling us on racism. We're looking at what racism is actually about, where it emanated from, and how it is affecting the development in our African continent. We talk of racism as a belief that different races possess distinctive characteristics, abilities, qualities, especially as to distinguish them from as inferior or superior to one another. So some people think that they are inferior, or that others are inferior to them, and that they are superior, and so they have to discrimination from women last week, and today we're talking about discrimination now for everybody, because everybody suffers from racism. And so we will be having Penelope Caperi, who will be talking to us about this aspect of racism. Join me, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in the studio, Penelope Caperi, who is from UK, of course, and she will be talking to us about racism. Penny, thank you for responding to our call, and thank you for being here today with me again in the studio to talk about racism. You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mbolifor. Thank you. No, thank you for providing the platform to have such a interesting but also nuanced conversation. As you indicated, racism has affected merely the Black people, both on the continent and in the diaspora, in some way or another. And yeah, so thank you. I'm excited to discuss this.
Yeah, we're talking about racism in Africa, and some people in the grassroots don't really understand what racism is, even though they suffer it in one way or the other. I begin by asking you what racism is all about. What is racism? Because the African man, some people don't understand. When they talk of racism, we think of black, white, but I'm sure that racism equally be in many diverse forms and not just from blacks to white or something like that.
I don't know if I agree with that, but the Oxford definition says racism is the marginalizing and oppression of people of color based. It's a social construct to sort of privilege white people, and this is done either through prejudice, discrimination, policies, and institutions that sort of embody what the white supremacy. I understand your question with regards to could it happen to black. That's a difficult one because for me personally, I think racism is so layered that if you don't have the power to implement it, then it's a form, you're just discriminating against that race. But racism has policies and institutions that in essence allows racism, if that makes sense. So I don't know if it could be done from a black person to another black person. And the reason I say that is if we look at history, racism started with the idea from white colonizers believing that they were much more supreme or much more higher up than the black race. And this was seen with the movement of the transatlantic slavery movement from the 1400s. That continued for at least 400 years until 1865 or so forth. And this was taking people from African countries and using them as commodity, selling them to work on plantations, um, picking cotton, and working and building the European and Americas to where it is today. So bringing them to civilization, basically, because a lot of these countries were always fighting or going through war. Within that, the commodity or the selling of black people wasn't as profitable anymore, because a lot of these countries were now moving into civilization. So they needed another way of building the economies. And you had some of these white colonizers moving into Africa. They found that most of these countries had raw materials that they could use to profit their economies. This is where the colonial rules time began. So imagine 1400s to 1865 or so forth. Between that, in 1882 to 1885, there's a Berlin Conference where they are now what is called the scramble for Africa. So there's an overlap. They come from a system of, firstly, believing that black people could be sold. Then there were so many laws put in place. Black people could not own land. They could not marry. As you know, with the slave movement, they separate the woman and the man from each other to demoralize them, because they knew that if they were a unit, they were stronger. And then they also put measures in place to ensure that they didn't go to school or they didn't read and write. So this was to basically dehumanize the black person. And then within that, they realized there's no more profit in slave trade. So there's people who believe that there was this liberal movement and people thought, oh, this is a bad thing, let's stop. But it wasn't. It was because they were not profiting anymore from selling and buying slaves. So then they moved into Africa and realized that there's so many minerals, as we know, that Africa is rich with gold and resources and minerals and so forth. So within that period, they started to go into Africa and repossess land that is not theirs from the Aboriginal people, which are mainly black native settlers. So there's an overlap between that slave trade into coming into colonial rule. So and this is the reality of what it is today. It's such a layered situation. That's why I don't think black to black could be racially could be seen as racist. I could see it as discrimination against another tribe or another black person. But racism has is much more. I feel like it's much more cruel and insidious than me. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but I hope that makes sense.
I was just looking at you when you were doing that submission. If it is actually that the blacks were not educated and they thought at that time that they were more educated than blacks, but we see recently that many blacks who went either as slaves ended up having children or marrying or intermarrying, and their children have now gone to school and are even more educated, if not well educated sometimes, than those who were perpetuating this act of racism. But they still continue to do this. Is it that they are frustrated, or they don't want to believe that the people they thought were slaves are actually now measuring up with them, rubbing shoulders with them, and doing some of the things that they thought only them could do and doing it even better? Is it some frustration on their side, or they just must practice racism?
I could imagine. I mean, if you dehumanize people and then they still rise up within the limited resources that they're provided and still push through, I could imagine that as somebody who, this is coined for years. The idea of racism is so institutionalized and structural till today. We're still experiencing it, and as we move forward in the conversation, I'll explain how. But like you indicated, some of these black people did end up going into school and so forth, but it came at bloodshed. This wasn't something that it was easy to do. It came at bloodshed, and we fought to be educated. Um, with, I mean, I don't know if that's a privilege. I don't know if we should take pride with that regard, because it's still, if there was no logic behind the difference between white and black, but they did make it logical. So they went as far as their literature became racist. You know, they started to define Black people as barbaric, as uncivilized. As you saw this, especially with the colonial era, when they were trying to justify why they were going into these African communities and basically possessing their lands. They said that we need to civilize the Black or the barbaric Black person because they don't know how to manage themselves in essentially, and that's a tone we still hear today, you know, with the idea of institutions such as WHO or whatever that provide all this foreign aid, is this idea that, you know, we need to save you because you're incapable of being helped. But in essence, they just remove self-sufficiency from these communities. So that's where racism today lives, is foreign aid. But it started from that idea that, you know, as Black people, you're very uncivilized, we're very barbaric, we're incapable. It went as far as them putting us into zoos. They believed that we were as close to a monkey. You know, there was this study of eugenics, and this was particularly seen in places like Namibia, where there was a genocide between the Herero and the Nama people. So they took the skulls, they started to study the skulls, and they brought this study back into Europe to say, you know, look at this Black person's skull. It's very different to a white person's skull, and it's because they're much more closely related to a monkey. So it was really insidious. It was horrific, the things they did. I mean, I give you an example of Namibia. So, you know, my great-grandfather is a liberation struggle hero in Namibia, but these people did not set out to be heroes or political leaders at the time. They were just living their normal lives, and then here comes these white settlers trying to repossess their land and their livestock. For them, it was foreign, but they didn't have the weaponry and the system and organizations that most of these colonizers had. So with Namibia, this was they decided to exterminate a certain race, and even till this day, the genocide in Namibia from 1904 to 1907 is not recognized as a genocide, and that's the first genocide of the 20th century. So the tactics they used on the Herero people is what they used in the Holocaust. So they trained all those tactics on us as Black people, and then, you know, it went on to be on the Holocaust. But we have never received reparations, and you'll find this even with the slave trade. There was no reparations for Black people after that. There was no reparations post-colonial in Africa today, and we don't even know that we can ask for it or we're owed it, you know. And this is the difficulty of where we are. You know, the idea of when we are saying how do we redevelop Africa is, firstly, we have to acknowledge that these things that happened were horrific, and in essence, there is this Stockholm syndrome. You know, you find that in most places, a lot of people are even fighting for the system in essence, because our education system has been colonized. You know, we study about Europe more than anything. We're all aspiring to get to Europe. That's where we believe that are the better jobs. The social culture of how we dress, you know, we've removed ourselves from our African cultural ways. And because it's been seen as uncivilized. You saw in South Africa when the young girls were fighting against their hair, even putting your own natural hair in a certain, you know, having it out is seen as unprofessional. So it's, yeah, it's very difficult, but racism is very layered and very nuanced, and it's still ongoing.
I just want to ask you this tricky question. We just came out from the Women's Week, where we talk about women being empowered and women crying for inequality. How will a woman who is already suffering from inequality and subjected again to racism, how do you manage that type of stress, Penny?
I mean, racism is also this intersectionality. So you find that if obviously if you're Black and then a woman again, then you're marginalized. If you're a Black woman and gay, you're marginalized. So there is that intersection. You know, for Black women, especially if I have to maybe compare it, especially in Europe, you find that there is this perception that if you're Black and you are maybe passionate as I am speaking right now, you'll be seen as aggressive. And this is a way to sort of silence Black women, not to express themselves. And that is what we call microaggression. It's in a sense, there's a tonality of racism to it, because it's the intimidation towards Black women. And then also one thing I wanted to touch on, especially if you're an African woman, then there's that layer of cultural requirements. Not only are you Black, not only are you in Africa, but then as an African woman as well, there's this cultural expectations and that patriarch. And then that again further pushes a lot of African women behind. There's this picture of African women, they work very hard, but that is very true. I just don't know any, I mean, I know people who are successful work hard, but there's this element, and this is where I tie in with racism and working hard. Not everybody who works hard is successful. And we see that very well with the African woman who works, crazy hours in the field, and this assumption that eventually one day she'll be rich. No, there's systems in place that will constantly keep her in that position. And that's maybe the horrendous character of racism, that it allows and gives opportunity for a certain race. If you don't look a certain way, you don't come from a certain family, and you don't have a certain skin tone, unfortunately, whether you work hard, sometimes it's about opportunity and not hard work. And we've seen that with how the world works. The 1% who own majority of certain things. Even with South Africa, the apartheid system, those people repossessed land that wasn't theirs. And yet today they are the 1% and owning 90% of the land. In the township of South Africa, the township covers only 20% of the land population, but 40% of those people live there. So you can only imagine how overpopulated the Black race is in South Africa, in townships and in underprivileged areas. Did that come because they weren't working hard? No, that's not true. So, and then there's this illusion that also white people have put, or the colonizers have put, that Black people are lazy, which is never true. So it's very layered. And when you ask about a Black woman, how it affects racism, especially if you're in Africa, it's this reality that, if you work hard and you suffer so hard, eventually something great will happen. But sometimes it's not that. And we are basically further marginalized than the Black man, if that makes sense.
We see in many European countries, blacks who are working for whites, and they do their work so diligently, and the whites actually exercise racism, and consider them as not even being qualified to be called humans. But when you look at the reverse, a white working under a black, the black treats that white with so much respect, so much love, and makes that person to feel that you are human, and that no matter the fact that you're working under me, whom you thought I am not able to be called even a human being, I still love you so much. How do blacks really still, with this pain, exercise so much love even for people? Because you see, even the housemate who is a white for a black person still wants to exercise racism, even though she is on the payroll of a black person. Is it this racism issue learned, or it is inherited or something?
It's definitely learned, and it's again what we said about just that chronological order of slavery, then colonization, and then this idea that we are post-colonial rule. It's a myth. We're on paper we're post-colonial rule with regards to independence, but it's independence on internal affairs. When it comes to external affairs, in essence, the UN and all these big corporations implement power. You saw that with Zimbabwe, when they came to I mean, I'm not agreeing to the measures that were used, but when Mugabe decided that, it's wrong that a certain race has land, because land is how you show prosperity for your people, really. When you don't have land, you don't have anything, in essence. So when he decided, okay, I want land for my, for people who live here and who are born here, they put sanctions on him. And they made it seem like, he was this, I mean, we will not take away that he wasn't a great leader. And that's a question for another day. And I think as Black people, we need to get away from this notion that there is a good and a bad cop. The politics in itself is you can't, it's not something you just answered, it's good and bad. We moralize everything. But the reality is, so we saw that reality with Zimbabwe. And So as a Black person, when you understand that if you do stand up against the white person, you are repressed. You get to believe that it's not your place to speak up against the white person, whether you're a political leader, whether you're just a normal child. I remember my mom worked as a waitress for a hotel called Safari Hotel. It's one of the big continental hotels in Namibia. She was a waitress there. There comes a white poor child, maybe 4 or 5, and my mom is serving the tables. She's been working there for hours, and the kid goes, "Hey, hey, hey, what are you doing here?" That kid is 3 or 4 years old, telling my mom, asking my mom, what is she doing here? Because for him, he's like, I've not seen any Black people here. What are you here? But this is a hotel that they've come to. So with that understanding, you realize that they are taught from a young age to impose that supremacy over Black people. And as Black people, we've internalized that to say that we are less than. And it's seen in our education system. You know, um, I know with places like Jamaica, their anthem or certain things in their history, it's sort of like God Save the Queen. And then you saw I don't know if you know about the Windrush scandal right now that is going on. In 1948, they brought Jamaicans to come and build their healthcare system. And, they basically, after the World War in Britain, they then decided to bring Black people from the Caribbean, and they came over thinking that they were, because there was in America, in the Caribbean, they were telling them that you're going to get a better job. This is your homeland. You're going to your country, your motherland. And these Black people who came really believed it. But when they came, they were put in harsh conditions. They had to work on the NHS and basically what the UK is today. The things that they praise the UK for is because of these Black people who came to work here. And in 2018, they decided that they want to send all those Black people back to their country after 60, 70 years of spending their lives here. Because a lot of them, when they came, the immigration system was very different. They didn't require certain stamps, but over time, because of this institutionalized racism, they started to change the laws to ensure that these people did not have or when they had to prove their right to leave, they couldn't provide those documentation, because a lot of them came as kids of their parents. And so they lost those documentation because they came in an era that didn't require that. So it's things like that where you can't pinpoint, but there's evidence to show that actually you're in the wrong as a Black person, and then they can monopolize or monetize on that. So it's a very difficult situation. We've inherited it, and I think we even wear it very proudly, because you find that even as Black people now we try and bleach. You see it in women in Africa. I think it was President Kagame who stopped the bleaching culture, and I was really happy when I saw that he was limiting any products that were coming in Rwanda with bleaching cream in it. So it's like we don't even know. It's unconscious now. And maybe when we're decolonizing ourselves, these are some things we can look at. Even the language, the idea that white is right. There's this white savior complex. When a white person comes to a place, you think they have money.
Mhm.
Me and a white person could sit here together, but you'll assume the white person has money because they're in the UK, but they could be getting paid less than me.
Yes.
And it's something that we have to unlearn as we move forward as Black people. We've been taught it. It's not our fault, but we need to recognize that we are doing it.
Okay, Penny, I have Cornelia Hetchell. Her name is always very difficult for me. She says, why can't we all just accept each other as human beings? My generation refused to carry this load anymore. Many of South Africans lost their lives, I think, during the apartheid system. And I have another person who is following us closely. That's Elvis Lowe. He says, how can we fight racism when our paychecks are from white people? I suppose I have noticed that most of our Black leaders are afraid to call out racism because they are afraid to lose their jobs. How can we solve this problem? He says that our leaders are afraid to call off racism because they are afraid to lose their jobs. And he asks, how can we solve this issue?
I agree. I agree. A lot of our leaders are afraid. It is a difficult position to be in, because imagine we've been destabilized to be in this position. They took our raw materials. And the thing that Africa, I think that's the issue, is we don't manufacture a lot of our products. Even though we have the raw minerals, the raw resources, we don't manufacture. And when we do, it's like these laws and tariffs that have been put in place to restrict us from providing products that are different. With Africa, we don't even trade within ourselves. We trade against our Western competitors. And I know Africa is trying to change that with the AU and building the one Africa currency and so forth. And even when you look at when the colonizers came, there's this assumption from people that, oh, at least when they came, they built infrastructure, they did this, but they built all of those things to benefit them at the time. So when you look at Cecil Rhodes, when he was trying to build the railway between South Africa from Cape Town to Cairo, that was really done because the British colonized South Africa and also colonized Egypt. So they wanted that trade between those two British colonies to be easy. So it wasn't done because they had us in mind and thought, in the near future, these Black people can benefit from it. So all of these things are systematic, and we still live through those moments. I mean, when the scramble from Africa was happening, they were cutting us up in maps like a cake. Some tribes got separated because, in chunks. So when they ask the question of why can't we all get together, it is very hard to come together when we have been told that we are different. And I think the only way we can come together is to stop looking at each other from seeking differences, but seeking commonality. So we have in essence the same struggle, and we fail to really monetize on that. We start to look at, oh, what does your tribe speak? Or why do you act this way? And we're looking for this hegemony of a Black race. We need to start defining what Africanism means, and we need to start working on it from a space of we have the same struggle in essence, whether we are in Europe or in Africa. We are kind of fighting similar battles. I know with Africa it's difficult because the leader you're fighting is Black. But I assure you, most of these leaders are still under imperial rule. They're still being their restrictions are coming from institutions from the West, and some of them want to break free, but it comes at a cost. And we've seen it with many African countries like Congo. You have to understand that these Western institutions do not care what political party is in place or which one is a rebel group or guerrilla group, as long as they have access to these raw materials and they can extract them during that time. So they're willing to support political systems that are not working. And it's a very underhandedness. And sometimes all we are seeing is the political leader acting a certain way and we just assume they're all bad. But there's actually a lot of sanctions, tariffs, things that have been put in place, like treaties that have been written ahead of these political leaders or ahead of independence. So it's very deep-seated, it's very heinous, it's very horrific to think about it. But I do think there is hope. I really do.
There is hope. There is hope. And I love when you say, how do we come together when we are told we are different? And I remember Professor Lumumba, who used to say that you pair a heavyweight and a lightweight, and you expect them, the lightweight, to come out successfully. And we're looking at forward to the Racism Week. And I want to ask you, why and what is actually the importance of this International Day, or of the International Day for Racism, when we just get it all the time? Is this day really necessary? Is it even having an impact on what it is fighting against? Or is just a day for celebration, a day for people to sign out outstations allowances, a day for people to make much money? Are those who really suffer from racism benefiting something from this day?
I didn't even know there was a racism day. I don't know if I ever want to take pride in a day that reminds me of how inferior I am. I would rather have, I don't know, something different, not called Racism Day, because I think, does it benefit the ones who are possibly not? But I think, it's interesting that we are on this platform, right? And we're discussing racial issues and how that affects African people. I have an issue with that For me, I feel like, it's telling a cheetah where to find me and how to eat me, basically. We don't have an institution where as African people can come and actually have these forums that build us. We're using the Western forum, tech and apps in essence. And that says a lot to us as African people. If we want to move forward and move past the idea that we are victims, because my mindset is, we have to be aware of what racism is. Definitely, we need to pinpoint it and understand it. But we also have to get to a level where we move above it, because racism is socially constructed. In essence, it benefits white people if we're constantly below. And like you said, I'm sure that they're probably, when we talk about days, like the white evil people, not all white people are that, but the ones who constructed racism, that Black people have moved past that phase and have got to education and are doing better. That's it. And it shows our human spirit, the Black human spirit, the Black African spirit to survive. It shows that we're capable of doing that, even in difficult situations. And we thank God for that. But my aim is to say that as Africans, if we want to move past this and not have this racism thing as a day that we constantly take pride in and celebrate, because it's not our thing. We didn't construct racism. Racism happened to us. They need to solve the issue, not us. We are aware of it. We stand against it. What we need to do is provide like a broadcasting system that, when we talk about even the news, when we get the news through the BBC. The BBC is a British corporation. I remember I was working for the BBC 2 years ago when they were just planning that they want to go into Nigeria and cover the different dialects. The BBC now is in Hausa. It's and we see that it's a good thing that they're speaking our language, but no, it's coming from the lens of your colonizer again. So if we don't start to think about spaces that are separate from the Western world, we will constantly be at the mercy. They say that the person who feeds you has power over you. And it's true. If our education comes from Europe, if our TV comes from Europe, if our social media comes from Europe, in essence, we subconsciously we're praising those spaces. Do you know what I mean?
I understand.
Mm.
So it's actually not benefiting us at all. It's a day,
No.
like you say, organized that we have nothing to celebrate about, because the people who started racism should solve this problem, not instead celebrate, like you put it. You talked of racism being, you talked of layered. Which are some of these layers or types, different types of racism that we can actually think or talk about, Penny?
It's not layered as in it's the sense of it comes in so many forms, as I said, from an educational point of view. Like when you come to the UK, they don't actually teach about the colonial era in the way that we learn it. They very much say that the white people came here, but it wasn't a great period and that's it. And they don't, and this is why a lot of people in the UK can't see themselves in a position of hurting a different race. So even now, when you do call out racism, like one person said there, they take it very personally because they're thinking you're saying, it's them who did it. They don't understand that concept that actually there was an evil that happened in history, as described by a literature, was it Sutkar or something, who said it was like the blackness at the time, a black history that overrided people at a certain period. Um, and even when I say it's layered, it's to do with institutions, as in, I can only give you an example here in the UK. In the UK, there is this quota of diversity and inclusion. It's this idea that you need to include Black people in your organizations, because if left to them, most of them were only having white people in their organizations. So they had to come up with this policy to try and ensure that there were Black people who were representing the population and the Commonwealth, right? So they need a policy, imagine. So in essence, when they do that, they will probably have a quota. They will bring maybe 2 people in the organization who are Black, but most of them will just do admin role, and there will be nobody in management who's Black. So in essence, you're in the space, but you don't have power. So it's layered in that aspect, when you also start to talk about maybe on the lands of Africa, what happened with the apartheid period, the white settler comes in, repossesses the land, and now they believe it's theirs. So when you speak about land repossession, they're getting angry, they're confused. But really, they understood that when they took the land, it wasn't theirs in the first place, and we have to buy it from the whites now on an extremely expensive price. So it's things like that that is very layered. That's racist because it wasn't yours to begin with. Um, when you talk about in the school in South Africa as well, I could give an example about the hair, indicating that the hair that grows out of a black child out of the root is unprofessional. What makes the straight hair professional? You're in an African country, but you believe a child who has Afro hair, the hair is unprofessional. So that's racist. The idea that people are segregated in a certain area, the black people are in poor areas and the white people are you have to ask yourself why in a black land. Why are most black people poor? That doesn't make sense. And now they make it seem like it's the political leaders. No, there were laws put in place, with especially with the apartheid era. It was a very much maneuvered strategic aim. There was an architecture, a town planning where they separated and segregated blacks against white. Until this day, people are still living in those conditions. So it's things like that you won't see, if you don't think about it and you don't know the history, it's very easy to lose sight and understand the implications. And I feel like the new racism today is to claim there's no racism. And it's happening across the board. The idea that, it doesn't exist is the new racism. The idea that we're all integrated. No, we're not. So yeah.
Somebody just made that comment here. I was loving the comment that is coming in where somebody says that UK is actually the house for racism, and that made me to actually laugh. You talked of South Africa, and we saw apartheid about 20 something years when it ended, or since it ended, and we actually saw how the blacks were marginalized in their own country. We are not saying that the whites who are South Africans were not in their own country, but South Africa actually, they after they have come, were already now they think, of Nelson Mandela. Why will they still, after a hero like Mandela, be going again into xenophobia, which to me looks very much like a new form of racism? What is your take about that, Penny?
Um, I agree. I think the idea of xenophobia is very painful. I am deeply hurt when Black people fight against each other because I think we play right into the hands of people who uh, create this idea of racism, because in essence is another way of them indicating that we are barbaric, that we are uncontrollable, that we can't manage ourselves. And in a sense is that reverse psychology, that you are so undermined that in essence you fight against your own. It's looking for somebody to blame. It's not to justify xenophobia, because I think the issue of xenophobia, especially in South Africa, is irrational, is very much irrational. But and I think this is the trauma of racism for me. I think is people not being able to articulate and showcase for themselves. Like they don't love themselves. They've really been suppressed so much that when they see themselves, they see the enemy. And when you see the self, that means you're seeing another Black person. Because you won't find those Black people trying to fight against the white settlers. And it should bring question as to why. Why aren't you putting that energy? And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to incite any hate, but is the idea that we have seen ourselves, it's very easy to fight your brother than, I guess, an enemy you can't, and you're told not to. I don't know. And there's repercussions if they ever fought white settlers. USA will go right into it and probably stop it, like they did when some white South Africans indicated that they were being thrown out or whatsoever. So it wouldn't happen. And I think it's also this idea that the black life does not have value. That's why we kill one another. It's like we have internalized that we don't have value. We kill one another because we have been told that we don't have value. We've been sold. We didn't have any rights. We couldn't buy a property. We couldn't do anything. And then, you're given this freedom without understanding where to go, with no reparations. If anything, I think it was Martin Luther King who said the release of the slave brought more economic downturn. And the reason that was because there was no reparations. You bring somebody from a plantation where he lived with his white settlers, he had at least 1 meal a day, and all of a sudden you're saying go free, and you put them in the south where there's probably no jobs, nothing. So it becomes very difficult. We're not free in essence because we don't have economic power, we don't have political power, we don't have power like we think we do. We know of the black person who is successful. We know middle class bourgeoisie. Um, that's fine. But on a whole, a lot of black people are suffering, especially on the continent, and we can all vouch for that. The wars that are being that are happening on the continent is because we don't believe that we have value for each other's life. We don't value each other's lives. And xenophobia for me is very stupid. I like what Julius Malema is saying. If you're fighting a black person, you're fighting your own brother. How can you in your own land want to go against? How then are we even going to talk about trading within one another if we keep fighting and killing one another? So again, it's like we are saying that we can only do it with the white people, but not with the black people. And it's this idea that we're untrustworthy amongst one another. It's all lies, and we have to unlearn that. And it's part of the decolonization story, unlearning certain things that we've been taught about our brothers and sisters, really understanding. And I think it was Steve Biko who was talking about love yourself, the black consciousness. That is not being taught anymore. We've lost sight of that. There's no visionary leader who's really, you're finding people like Magafuli and so forth who are speaking up. But it's very difficult with the noise of states that want black people to fight. When black people are fighting, they're amplified. This we see it all over the place. So it's saddening. But it's something that is uncommon to us, and we should not agree to it. There should be repercussions, I think.
Okay, today we are looking at how racism has affected the development of African countries. How do you think this issue of racism has actually affected the African continent, Penny?
Well, that point that I brought about, it's got to the point where it's so deep-seated that we have internalized the hate within ourselves, and now we hate our brothers. So xenophobia is a prime example where, Nigerians are being killed in South Africa unlawfully, and there's no repercussions. And even if there is, it's very much little. And the real issue in South Africa is those people just want a job. So the issue they have is with their government and so forth. It's not with another black person. And this assumption that the Nigerians come and steal their jobs is a lie. Our jobs were stolen in 1994 when the treaties were being signed over, but to allow the white men, 1% of a population to own the mining, the beers. The diamond comes from Namibia, is manufactured and then sold all the way into the West. You're not looking into that, but you're just assuming that this black person who's come, who is as poor as you are, has come to steal, has stolen your job. It's a lie. That is even, it's sad. So things like that, we need to start re-educating our people about black consciousness, black love, and I think that comes from education, providing supplementary schools for our children, so they can learn and love their own hair, love their own skin, understand their power in the world. I think that idea of education needs to come back. And then also, like I indicated, to develop ourselves, we need to start creating forums and institutions outside of the West The one thing I find, especially with the Africans in the diaspora and the Africa in the motherland, is the disconnect. We are fighting battles of racism here while Africans in the motherland are fighting tribalism and Black leaders. And I think once we can have an organized, mobilized institution where we can clearly define what we are about as African people, really define what Africanness means, the sort of going from the Pan-Africanist notion, and then having clear data. The problem we have in Africa is there's no statistics. We go from one country to the next, and each country again reflects their colonizer. The countries I gave you is a reflection of Germany, but I'm sure in the Cameroon, the issue is to do with France and the franc. And then also we need to start trading between ourselves. I think there's so much power within that. Start also manufacturing our products. You saw with China, they just locked off China. I'm not saying those are the right ways, but today China even manufactures a pen. Africa needs to get to that space where they, in essence, the TV, everything should show Africans, should represent us. When we start to see ourselves, we can start to value ourselves. We can start to take ownership of who we are. Because right now, in essence, it does feel like we don't have ownership of who we are. Even when we think that we have successfully got money, it's elusive. It's elusive because we're getting money through the structures of the white gaze. The education that you're studying, the history of the white person to go and study in an institution in a European country. The people who are here who are experts and are managers, we're solving problems of the UK. Do you understand? I'm a manager because I'm here to solve problems. That's really your title. And we're solving issues that are affecting the British economy. And if Africa started to value human productivity. What drove slave trade was human productivity. What is driving the UK economy today is human productivity, service. And Africans need to start value people, start valuing one another, start valuing talent. Until we start doing that, we're going to keep going behind. Wanting to assume that just one person in the family goes to Europe is a great thing. That's a problem. All three of your kids need to be educated and having a good job, and it should be in your own country.
We have a viewer who is asking that how can we educate ourselves when we have been brainwashed by the false education? Since he's surely reacting to one of the causes or the solutions to coming out of racism, like you talked of education, and the person is asking that how do we educate ourselves, of course, when we have been brainwashed by the false education? I don't know whether he wants to talk about
Yeah,
brain drain.
the education system in itself is flawed. I know in Namibia we're 2 million people, and I remember coming to the UK, they had to change my grades to the British whatever, and I thought to myself, this is ridiculous. That in essence, your education level is considered lower because it's African. Before I even got into a class, that's what happened. So and I think there should be an issue with that as Africans. We should and I was studying English, the Queen's English. If anything, I came here, I used to talk there, they. I realized people don't speak like that here. We're studying this old historical archaic history of English of English that's not even being spoken in the country itself. So it's outdated. Even science and mathematics is outdated. We have to start educating our kids through the African narrative. Orating. People love storytelling. There's African leaders who are really good, but as storytellers, it's not just book and writing. We need to provide an education system that fits right into the need in the economy. Africa is not yet as industrialized as the West. So why are we all studying to have PhDs when there's no investment or company that is going to be in the economy? If we know agriculture is the main thing, if we know that there's waste management required, if they know that there's townships that need town planning, then you study those courses that feeds so that the people can work in those areas. That's how you start to rebuild the economy. We live in essence an elusive lifestyle. We're putting our kids in the rural area to say to them, one day you'll go to Europe. Really, what are the odds? Let's not even put morality on it, just be realistic. That child who's in the rural area needs to learn about agriculture in that area to start using the resources they have to build that area. They can't start thinking about the West, and it's that re-education that for me, decolonizing the education system, that's what it means for me, is really looking at our curriculum and changing it all together to fit our economies. In Africa, I would hope that my child will say, I want to go to Nigeria because they have the best university in, I don't know, Hausa or whatever else. We need to all have this also common language. You'll find, but Bolivar, you who's Black French and I am Black English, we will get into a room. We can't communicate with one another in Europe because you speak French, I speak English. But if there's a white person there, I'm more likely to speak to the white English person, because for me and you, we can't communicate even though we look the same. So this is the power of language that it has made from our colonizers. And this is what we're talking about racism. When you come to Europe, you are both Black, but you can't communicate with one another because you are speaking French and I'm speaking English, or I'm speaking Spanish and Portuguese, and I'm so proud. But it's stupid because they just see us both as Black and both as lower than them. So we have to start looking at teaching and being proud of teaching either Swahili, a common language across Africa that our kids can start speaking in and communicating. So wherever they are unified. And you find that with especially the Middle East community, So we need to start rethinking the education system in that way, where it fits on the African narrative and it empowers them, basically.
Thank you so much for that submission. You say we should actually reform our educational systems and do what actually is needed so that we can better handle this issue of racism. And we have another question here, which says that how do we decolonize our minds when we Black people refuse to acknowledge our gifts, our abilities, and our genuinity? Yeah, yeah, that's the
Yeah.
question. We don't acknowledge what we have, we don't acknowledge our abilities and what we can do. How then do we manage or decolonize our mindset? We are having 8 minutes to go, so you
Yeah.
take
I,
that
I
one
mean,
very fast.
firstly, as African people, we need to start taking responsibility. My friend put out a quote the other day that people want to change but are scared of the change, or don't take the steps to change. This idea that tomorrow I'll exercise, but I'm still eating something that's unhealthy. So you have to take responsibility. And I think with Africa, with I find that when I'm around Africans, a lot of us are passive, and I don't know if it's because of it's our culture. We are very much tomorrow, tomorrow. You have to be radical with this type of notions. You can't, especially if you have kids, you need to start taking ownership and understanding that this is going to affect your kids on a different scope, especially in this climate. If your child doesn't know who they are, they're really going to find it difficult, especially when they're pulled in different directions with distractions, with social media. We need to start changing our ways of thought, because in essence, we are thinking that and I think it's Stockley who said this idea of racism, that we had Malcolm X, who didn't do no violence, racism still continued. We had Malcolm X, who did violence, racism continues. This institution is not a consciousness, it's not a moral space. It's policies that have been put to benefit the West. It's a monetary, it's an economic game, it's a warfare. It's not about whether the Black person like me or the white person doesn't like me. This is above us. And if we don't take ownership of ourselves like the Chinese did, and where they reformed their whole culture. Really, it was about China manufacturing. This was the mission. Everybody got on top of it. Because the assumption also that because China is not the West is better. They are two enemies. Eventually, China will not want anybody to go above them. And Africa, if they get to that space of civilization, they will have to keep them underneath. So don't moralize everything. This is a game that's played and the rules change all the time. So we need to take ownership of where we want to drive Africa and be serious about it. We can't be having these conversations over and over again every year. My child should not have this conversation, God forbid. And then
Sure.
one other question, I wanted to lead on something. Also, this is a spiritual battle also, I was going to say. You asked, how can we decolonize our mind? This is spiritual. It's the idea that God, reminds us of who you are. You are my child. Every land, every place you put your foot on, I've provided unto you. And you saw, like, with the issue of the Israelites, they didn't even believe it, and they started to follow their own gods. Is you have to understand who your creator is for you to know who your identity is, to take power and possession within that, because it's very difficult. Because what is happening now is we have made evil good and good evil, right?
Yeah.
And until we start to see our true reflection on who our identity is in God, we're constantly going to be those lawless people, landless, just moving up and down with an orphan spirit, not knowing who we are, blaming. I mean, in essence, white people see it as us blaming them all the time. So there has to get a time where we're like, this is who we are, this is the people God created, and this is our power, and we take ownership. We are very resourceful people. We are very resourceful people. We're small, we can do so much. We just need to unite. And we need to start creating platforms to unite. And it's uniting in the same identity, not in the differences.
All right, we have 4 minutes. A word to the stakeholders who are there to actually put the laws in place for racism to be abolished in Africa. What can you tell those who are in power as concerns this
I
racism
mean,
issue?
it's like asking your enemy to release you. That's not that's I think we have to change our mindset altogether. Your aim is not to ask for it, is to start creating structures that are separate from that. We should stop moving into these structures that again ask for those leaders. If you keep asking, they're gonna keep feeding you what they think you want to ensure that they are still above you. So I think it's moving away. Don't think that's it's like start to think of a new road altogether. You have this one path, you realize it's going nowhere, create your own path. That's where Africa needs to start going. And it's a shift. It takes organization. We need to be strategic. Africans are not strategic. We're like impulsive. Um, and that works, but you're fighting against the enemy that has done this for years. And they have studied the Black person, they've studied the African person. We need to get to that level.
Thank you so much, Penny, for always coming around. You've been quite so resourceful this evening talk about racism, and I wish equally to greet those who have been participating and sending their comments on. It's so helpful because we get to get your worries and equally tackle them immediately as you send them. We have many comments still coming in. We will answer some of them and send back to you. Thank you, Penny, for
Oh,
always coming
well,
around.
I'm not a racist expert. I'm just,
Yeah,
but
it's a
yeah,
conversation, and we are giving our point of view as concerns racism. Because you are even better placed because you maybe experience racism, even though you are doing
yeah,
your job
that's
very,
true.
very
That's
well.
very true. Because I was raised in Namibia, and that is an apartheid system. And then I came here into the UK, and I sort of got the colonial sort of racism. So in essence, yeah, I got the worst of both worlds.
So
But I'm surviving, and I'm still
you,
fighting through, and I'm still
yeah,
Black and proud.
you actually presented to us what you go through every day. I think the solutions that you have given are solutions that you yourself have gone through, experimented, thought over them, and you are seeing that they can actually help to stop this issue of racism. I talked of trade, that we should be able to trade among ourselves, educate ourselves, get proper educational systems that will help us to learn our own history and not foreign history, and that we should process our farm produce. That is one of the things we've been talking about for over 2 months now. January, February, we are on farming with Professor Ruben, who is giving us much information as concerns farming and how we can process our produce. And you talk of valuing ourselves, that's our own culture, and owning ourselves. So we need to know who we are, the qualities that we have, and that we are up to the task, and that we can always do very well in anything that we want to do. Thank you, Penny, so much for always responding present
Thank
during our
you.
talk. And it's always been so nice talking with you, discussing with you for 1 hour. Sometimes I even don't have questions to ask because you keep answering the questions that are coming in my mind every second. And I just say, wow, you're so resourceful when you're
Oh,
around.
God
Thank
bless you.
you.
No, God bless you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. And I also want to preface that saying that this is not about white and Black. It's not about the white friend that you have. It's bigger than that. And I don't speak this to say, there's hate, because we are doing the reverse if we start to encourage hate. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about institutions and policies that are above your white friend. And you're seeing that in this new age where, with the Black Lives Matter, white people came and campaigned with us, but yet there's still police brutality that has unconscious bias in most of these areas. So it's beyond that. It's the treaties that were signed a long time ago that benefits corporations, that sort of continue to amplify this white supremacy. And so I love, care for white people, but this is bigger than that. It's just educating ourselves to understand that it's so separate. It's about you as a Black person and our journey. I hope that was clear, and thank you so much.
Very clear. And I leave for our viewers with this, that love is powerful and it comes naturally more than hate. Thank you so much for listening and watching us on the Some Point Global TV. Penny, hope to be having you again very soon on the program, and have a nice evening. Bye bye for now.
Take care.